Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Ryan McGowan. Ryan McGowan is a Chief Revenue Officer over at Risk360. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you for having me on, Pete. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career thus far?
Yeah, for sure. So as you mentioned, Chief Revenue Officer for Risk360. Risk360 is, we call ourselves the platform-enabled professional services firm of the future. So we effectively provide audit, implementation, and manage programs, as well as offensive security services through our platform called Phalanx. So that's where I'm at today. Been here since just about the onset of the pandemic, actually. I guess in terms of my career, I think what's unique about me is I'm 25 years in. I just actually crossed the 25-year milestone in terms of being, out of school and in the professional world. I've had 3 employers, so I think that's pretty unusual, particularly in both technology as well as in sales. I mean, that's frankly unheard of. But got out of school, wasn't very career oriented in terms of my background. I just wanted to get through school, right? And then I was going to just get into the working world and try hard. And ended up kind of lucking into a systems integrator reseller, fairly small company out of school. It was a awesome, I basically refer to it as a poor man's MBA because I had my hands in a lot of different things fairly quickly, and really gave me a strong sense of like P&Ls and effectively using ROI calculators in the decision-making process, as well as valuing the customer basically. But I had a 7-year run there. Then I really lucked in to this little bootstrap shop. I was employee number 28 at Coalfire. At the time, I was just looking to get out of kind of hardware and into services, and lucked into cybersecurity services at the time, and the rest is history. So effectively been in cyber since 2005 at this point.
Yeah, and back before cyber was really a thing, people
Yes.
were doing security work, but it didn't necessarily have a name yet. So, and obviously you're managing a sales team now, and you've worked with a lot of professional services firms. In all of that work that you've done, and very stable job history, by the way, like you said, that's super rare.
Yeah.
Have you found that there's a quote unquote talent gap in the delivery of services and or in building sales teams? Is it different, or is it, is there one at all in each of those areas?
I think it's certainly, there's more of a talent gap in the cyber technical SME realm, I would suggest. Sales is about solving problems, and I think the best salespeople are ones that can come into a new industry, learn what the prevalent business problems are and how their solutions solve them, and be effective fairly quickly. That same applies for marketing, having responsibilities for marketing as well. I think, there's a playbook for some of that stuff that isn't necessarily cyber specific, and cyber can be taught, so I would definitely suggest that when they're speaking to cybersecurity, SME shortages, I think they're talking about, the operator, the doer of deeds, and people that are rolling their sleeves up and actually executing, more so than selling and marketing it.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I see a lot of people coming over from technology sales, software sales, into selling services. Have you noticed that there's a blueprint for a successful salespeople in security? Like, is it soft skills that you look for? Is it drive, or is it like previous knowledge in security?
Yeah, well, I think really to answer that question, I'll start with like services effectively versus product. I think in the selling of services, what I found to be the case is you have to be really strong internally in terms of being able to get the business to rally behind you whether that be in the form of like developing close relationships with folks that are actually out in the field delivering the work, or those that are responsible for the teams that are out in the field doing the work. So being able to like build, high quality internal equity within your own company, I think is critical if you're going to sell professional services, at scale and successfully. Professional services, obviously, it's much less tangible, much more discretion in terms of the level of effort and fee structure and budgeting and things of that nature. It's a team sale, particularly nowhere more so than when you're selling services. At least that's been my experience.
No, that's great. It's really interesting that you take a very strategic approach to partnering with the team on the internal side. I would think the focus would be on client service and talking to clients and really making that the focus. But it's great to hear that you're aligning yourself closely with the folks internally and the people delivering on the work that you're selling. That's been something I think with a lot of both services and product companies that I think is lacking. You have almost a wall between sales and administrative functions and delivery teams, and they just really don't talk to each other.
But, and it makes no sense, right? It really does. It makes no sense. You think a salesperson, inherently, you're strong with other people. You thrive in building relationships that are close. And you would think that sales folks would consider that core to their job, basically, is I'm going to rally around, I'm going to build a bunch of, champions of me within here, folks that want to sell alongside me, people that want to, team up with me and go out and conquer. And the reality is there's a lot of sales folks that are, to your point, they're focused on selling, basically, and whatever that entails. And in their view, the business owes them the support, and their job is just, to go out there and sell. I've always taken a different approach. I think they're force multipliers. They being folks that are, technical, can bring, further credibility to hopefully the talk tracks that I've been going down with the customer. So I just, I hit on that early in my career. I've lucked out and had the great opportunity to work with really smart folks and to take services to market en masse with them. And it's a lot more rewarding too. So yeah, definitely. If you're in sales, make friends with those technical SMEs that support the sale. That's bottom line.
Yeah, I see a lot of parallels with recruiting too. I think really effective recruiters are essentially salespeople for the company as well. They're just selling
100%.
The company's culture versus their services. And in order to be effective in doing that, they have to really understand the highs and lows of the teams and what it's like to be, for instance, an auditor or assessor, and what challenges they're going through, so they can make it good, bad, and ugly for the candidates. So they get a really strong sense of what it's actually like walking in on day one, and then but being there for over a year. What
That's exactly right.
Challenges and everything they can overcome. Do you ever encounter that in the sales realm where you have to set expectations and it's not 100% positive? Like there may be some things that you have to kind of address objections or things that you can kind of head off at the pass?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a risk management. I mean, I don't want to bring somebody on that doesn't have their eyes wide open. I think transparency is always my style. I mean, that's just the easiest way to live. I go to sleep pretty quickly when I put my head on the pillow. So I'm not into game playing, and I'm not into short-term fixes. So if I'm going to bring somebody onto the team, I'm obviously going to let them know why I'm excited about the firm, why I'm here, what the challenges are that I'm excited and eager to tackle, and how I see them supporting that mission. But I think, the cup fulleth over is not the story that I'm giving folks when I'm trying to appeal to them to consider joining forces with us. I'm definitely, like, we're in the problem solving business first and foremost, right? So what are the problems that we're trying to solve, and how can you help me solve them, and how are we going to do them together?
Very cool. Yeah, and collaboration is also, I would imagine, pretty key. I think it depends to what level of collaboration you have on kind of your management style and what you expect out of people, and feedback loops that you have with the folks reporting to you. Do you have any best practices as far as 360 feedback, or your management style and the way that you help, I guess, guide productive employees?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think to the first part of that question, like, yeah, I have a management philosophy. You know, I've kind of accumulated some core tenets, if you will, that over time that I've documented. Some of which I've seen other, high visibility leaders and coaches have as core tenets and principles for that of their own. But yeah, I mean, at least annually and after at every new hire, I walk them through. Hey, this is what I value. This is what's important to me, as well as the next slide rather is here's where I know I'm weak. Here's where I know I'm going to need help. Here's where I have insecurities, things of that nature, and so I'm trying to let them know, like, these are the values that or these are the traits rather that I value. I'm going to try to demonstrate them myself. I'm constantly trying to demonstrate them myself. I'd like you to do the same effectively. So definitely that. In terms of 360s, absolutely. I mean, I think if nothing else, I want my team to feel that they can criticize me and coach me up on how to best support them. There are some systems and processes that I have in place. I mean, I definitely am an ardent believer in recurring stand-up meetings with all of your direct reports. I've got, weekly meetings with everybody on the team that reports directly to me, and then at least quarterly syncs with any, second level members of the squad. And then as well as a recurring team meeting, also weekly, where we all come together, break bread, talk about what we're doing and how we're doing it, that type of thing. So basically just build a cadence where you've got a recurring meeting schedule, and there's equal times for their agenda, what they want to get out of the meeting, as well as your own. So, always striving to do better in that area, but certainly not neglecting it entirely.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I like the idea that you mentioned it's a cadence. It's much like a sales cadence. You have a process
Absolutely.
that you follow. And if you set
Yep.
aside the time and everybody knows, that time is for that activity and that is important, it's much easier to stick to it versus sort of an ad hoc, let's all get together. Feels like a good time to do so. But if you have that time set aside and everybody's on the same page, it's a good way to go about it. What about, you'd mentioned,
100%.
you kind of alluded to this earlier with turnover being so high in tech, so high in sales. I know a little bit about your culture there at 360, and I know folks tend to stick around. Do you have any best practices for hanging on to folks when they're, high achievers and there is such high turnover and a lot of opportunity in the industry?
Love them and pay them. Love them and pay them, and build a culture that that they thrive in. They give them line of sight on future opportunities for advancement. That, as a high growth company such as ours, I was just on a call yesterday with a team member. We've got we call it coffee with the craftsman, where basically the Slack algorithm every week randomly assigns us a coffee with a craftsman. And I had a conversation yesterday, and I said, and it was somebody young in their career that I don't always necessarily cross paths with, but my message to them was, we don't even know our needs 18 months from now. In terms of, you're gonna have the opportunity to fill gaps we don't even know we have in the future, and lead the mission to do that. So, love them, pay them, ensure you've got a culture where they thrive, and keep line of sight on what that next thing is for them. That's my advice. We don't bat 1,000. That's ultimately what we're trying to accomplish here. I think we've got a lot of that in place, and I appreciate you acknowledging that that's the impression, at least from the outside. But don't rest on your laurels. I don't want to be in a regretful position in the future where, the easy things like showing them love, or paying them at or above market, or having conversations about where they hope to be in a year or two. You don't have those things and they leave. That's on you ultimately, right? So put systems and processes in place to ensure you're not regretful when they do in fact voluntarily depart.
Yeah, and how do you, I guess, gracefully, because ultimately you're going to have some people leave at some point. How
Yep.
do you gracefully ensure that transition is good for everybody and there's no, abrupt shocks to the system and everybody's on the same page. Like, how do you ensure that that person isn't leaving for something that you could have maybe caught earlier,
Or
or
use them
something
for.
like that?
Yeah. You know, I don't know if this is the gist of the question, Pete. I might need you to restate it, but ultimately, when they leave, they're alumni of your firm, and hopefully, they're out crushing it like they crush it for you, and they are evangelizing your brand in the process, right? They came up, there's this concept in sports like of a coaching tree. They worked with this team, and I look at all the members from that team and how well they're all doing. We hopefully that's what we're building at Risk 360 is a bunch of is a coaching tree of future leaders within the cyberspace. But in terms of when they leave, I think when I was younger in my career, it was very hard for me to lose departing members of the team because, there was a victim response on my part. Like, why are they leaving me? I've given them everything I could give them. Now, when they leave, it's like, okay, well, if I trust that you're looking out for yourself, and if you believe it's what's in your best interest, then man, I'm all about it. Good luck. Go light it up and represent your time here well.
Yeah, I think a good measure of if you've done your due diligence is if they leave with a positive impression, and despite the fact they're leaving, they would say positive things about your firm. So,
or they leave and you're still texting with them 2.5 years after they've left, for example. That's happened a number of times. It's not personal; it is business. Ultimately, it's cliche, but it's true.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, sometimes there's a reason that cliches are what they are. It's
exactly.
Grounded in truth.
Yep.
How did you change your mindset from that, victim mentality to accepting things for what they were?
The further along in my career, Pete, the more I value experience. Ultimately, just experience. I grew up, I figured some things out that I didn't necessarily know when I was younger in my career. When I was younger in my career, I thought it was an effort game. They've been doing it for 20 years. That's a lot of wear on those tires. I can do it. I can do it better. I can do it faster, harder, hungrier. The older I get, the more I value experience, pattern recognition, things that you've seen before that you can navigate differently for a better outcome. So I think I just matured, I've just matured.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one thing I don't think most people think about when they look at hiring, is looking for maturity. I think some people mature faster than others, for sure. Yeah. How do you balance that line in hiring between hiring somebody that's mature and they've been through some things with having the energy and motivation and a lot of those intangibles that makes them truly, hungry to sell? Like, how do you balance those two things when you're hiring?
That's a tough question, man. Well, I mean, the answer is, what's the role? If it's a role where, that's the expectation, is that you're coming in green and we're going to teach you how to do this, then, you introduce the playbook for how you ramp folks up from where they're at to where you need them to be. If they're inexperienced, you're putting them in an experienced role. That's where some of the management challenges arise from, right? That's where you find yourself probably in more of a player coach mode, where you're doing it alongside him or her until they get up to speed. But I think you try to hire the right experience into the right role ultimately, and the trick, or the secret of the sauce, which I certainly haven't nailed, is how to get that high achiever into a role that maybe even he or she doesn't believe they're qualified to do, and have them do that at a reasonable clip. That's really a challenge.
Yeah, it's a topic I discuss pretty often, actually. What you're describing, I think, is the zone of proximal development, that stretch position for somebody that's maybe a level above where they're comfortable at.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a stretch for them, and maybe there is a lot of discomfort in doing that, but in stretching somebody like that, they're going to learn faster out of necessity, because they have to. But that can also, I think, go too far. If somebody is truly not ready for that role and it's just too much for them, I'm guessing you would make it a point then to monitor to make sure that that person's not really extending themselves too far.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of where, like, honesty, rapport, and a recurring cadence that keeps you chatting about things like, where's your head at? How are you doing? Um, are you thriving? Is your cup half full or half empty? Um, Having the channels of communication, I think, would be, critical way to solve that, or to pick up signs that maybe he or she isn't necessarily, thriving in the role.
Yeah. Yeah. Just having those constant touch points that allows you that opportunity. And I would imagine if you've done a good job of, building rapport, like you said, you had that trust built in to where they feel comfortable coming to you if something is off. When I worked at a large corporate staffing firm, it was very much that grind, that email blast, that, make so many outbound dials a day, because that's the way we've always done it. And I would suggest, we're not getting any results with these tactics. Maybe let's try something else, like LinkedIn. But management wasn't open to that. So I think keeping an open mind is always important, knowing what isn't working and adjusting course. But at the same time, having, I know grit's important to you, having the grit to buckle down and get things done when you know that whatever strategy you're using does work. It's a matter of time and attention. So how do you know when to change strategy? If something isn't working, is there
I think the B2B sales environment, Pete, in the last 10 years, I think it's changed dramatically. Like, I just use Risk360 in my time here as an example. I came over being a career sales leader, without, great deal of marketing respect, probably would be the way, in terms of, didn't value marketing a great deal. Had worked with some high performing marketing teams, but, sales and marketing don't necessarily see eye to eye, at least in my experience. But I'm getting to this point. It's just taking me a minute. When I came over to Risk360, what did I do? I built out a marketing function first, right? We had a sales, we had an individual in sales, and my first 3 hires have all been in marketing, because I don't believe that an outbound motion for professional services and platform-enabled professional services, I don't think outbound is the way to do it. I think the way to do it is you build a brand and you attract folks to your brand, and you do that through marketing, and you let marketing success justify your investment in scaling out a sales organization. That's the playbook I'm deploying here. I think that's pretty much been the playbook the last 5 years of most B2B companies that are not dinosaurs. I think that's the way to do it today. So I think every sales org should have an outbound motion, but I think it complements, hopefully, inbound volume that's driven out of marketing. And that's ultimately what we're rolling out. We've been deployed here to great success.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And it echoes what I've found as a small business owner as well. I've certainly tried the outbound biz dev, cold calling on LinkedIn and things like that. But I've always gotten the most clients from people that came to me or enjoyed my content or were a referral. It was all inbound. And I wouldn't go so far as to say cold calling is dead, but it doesn't have the same impact maybe that it did 20 years ago.
100%.
Yeah, I think recruiting is much the same way. The old ways of recruiting, of so many calls, so many people talk to, things like that. When I got into security, I discovered it's a much more qualitative thing. It's more focused, it's more precise, it's more relationship driven, consultative, things like that. And I would imagine services, like you said, is kind of like that versus products. you would
Yeah.
draw a distinction between those?
I mean, I don't know. I think so. I think B2B though, and when I say B2B, I'm talking about SaaS products too. I think if I'm a young, early stage B2B SaaS company, I'm trying to get my brand out there, and it's not going to be at 20 calls an hour. That is not how I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to try to do it by getting my brand visibility across all channels and letting that brand drive inbound ultimately. It used to be also there's this element of like cold calling. I came up in the you got to earn your stripes. Here's Salesforce. This is your territory. Go use Dun and Bradstreet and start pounding the phones. And it bore some fruit. Did it bear enough fruit to justify the time spent on it? Probably not. Did we have an inbound? Was our inbound thriving? No. What else am I going to be doing then? If your inbound's not thriving and you're not picking up the phone, then you're effectively what? Just praying? Yeah. I mean, you got to do something. There's got to be activity. But I think like coming up in sales, that was where you started, was pounding the phones. If I were to hire, a young somebody early in their career and have them come on and support the mission here at Risk 360, it would not be by pounding the phones. It would not be by pounding the phone. It would be through targeted and tactful outbound campaigning, effectively.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think especially with security people as your target audience, you have to be careful about getting yourself on a blacklist or abusing PII that you found through a list somewhere, and that can turn people off. Like I know some of my competitors are still doing that, the very old school way of doing biz dev, and I think it does work for them. There's a reason that they have some clients that I don't, but I'm also super cautious about, as I'm building my brand and building a name for myself and my firm, I need to be extra careful about damaging that brand. The way I see it is I can't afford to turn anybody off before they know who I really am and we get a chance to get to know these folks. So
yeah,
I
don't know. I'm not worried about any blacklists. I'm pretty comfortable with what we're doing and how we're doing it, what the motivations are. And if somebody wants to put me on a blacklist, then, okay. All right. I didn't earn it. I promise you.
Fair enough. What about the relationship between sales and recruiting? Do you ever see there being, parallels there, or would you think any of the best practices that you've picked up over the years might be able to be employed by recruiting teams?
Interesting. That's an interesting question, Pete. I don't know that I've thought about it. I certainly see recruiting and sales commonalities in terms of, you're trying to bring bodies on or place bodies. And we're trying to, move products and services. Tactically, I don't know, man. I'll get back to you on that. I think in sales, it's about, like I said, we're problem solvers. The best sellers are the best problem solvers. So, what's the correlation in recruiting? I'll ask you. What's the equivalent for the best recruiters? Like, how would you answer that question?
Well, so I spend a lot of time on motivators, which is often the process of discovering pain. It's finding what drives somebody that they're not achieving in their current role, or they're not happy with, or maybe their boss sucks, or have enough flexibility, or they're returning to office. There's always something, and you need to have, as a recruiter, the emotional intelligence to dig past the surface. I've found if you take everybody's first answer, that's usually a canned response, and it's not really what you want. And I would imagine it's much the same in sales as well. But you're solving pain essentially.
Ultimately, I just thought that through further as you're talking about it. And I think what we use in sales is current state. What are the negative consequences? And if you're familiar with force management through which I'm a disciple. This is their language. I'm just restating it. Current state, what are the negative consequences of where your candidates are at, and then what would the future state look like if those, if they got what they wanted, and you found and you were able to place them somewhere, what does that personal outcome look like, and how does that help them achieve whatever they're trying to accomplish? So yeah, I guess that's the correlation right there.
Yeah, I think there's the power of story as well. And in recruiting case, or it could be sales as well, I guess you have almost case studies from previous clients, or for us, previous candidates that ended up in a role that ended up being way better for them because, maybe it was a smaller company, they had more responsibility, they really grew into that role, and it was a springboard for the rest of their career. I think a lot of people are just extremely comfortable where they're at, and they haven't even thought about making a move, especially in this economy. People are freaked out by the idea of change when they don't know what the economy is going to do.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to, you have to listen to their fears, but at the same time help them realize, like, look, there might actually be something better out there. I know you think you have it pretty good, but somebody has some sort of little pain, that they didn't even realize could be fixed. They might think that thing is present in every company.
Right.
And it's not. So
yeah, we get conditioned, right? We get conditioned just in general, and comfortable, and change is the unknown, right? So I can imagine those are, well, not unlike sales. You're probably navigating those types of conversations all the time in a recruiting business.
Yep, for sure. What about the relationship between sales and your consulting or delivery teams? I mean, it sounds like you have a pretty good relationship with those folks. How do you ensure that you have enough, I guess, delivery people to deliver on the work that you're selling, and that they're, keeping your brand name, the company's brand name, intact when they're delivering on that work?
Business planning, so it's the business knowing what's in the pipeline. It's doing resource planning, looking at sold work backlog and pipeline, and identifying what we're looking at in terms of capacity. And if we've got to measure, we call it contribution margin, which is basically an indicator of, we use it as an indicator of whether or not we're hot, we're running hot, we've got excess capacity, or we're where we should be, somewhere in the middle there. So it's basically, it's a collaboration between the sales function, the leader of the professional services side, as well as finance. We kind of all come together, and we have recurring reporting on things of that nature, so that everybody's in the loop, and we can anticipate, effectively we can anticipate the future based on those criteria.
Yeah, I would imagine it's a lot of science. There may be a little bit of art in there. I worked for a small and growing consulting firm, and I was employee number 15. So I get the whole explosive growth and adding headcount as fast as you can possibly onboard them. When I was in that situation, it was always a game of catch up. We weren't doing any planning ahead, or if we were, it was always, well, we need 10 more bodies yesterday, but that's just not a sustainable way of hiring. And ultimately, you're going to stretch the service delivery teams too thin that way. But then, you could have the opposite problem where you're planning too much ahead and you hire too many people. We've seen that's kind of the story of this last year from what I've seen. Consulting firms, I never thought I would see lay people off. They planned for the growth to continue, and then when it just stopped, the ride stopped, and everybody had to find their seats, and a lot of people were left out in the cold. Even the big four were victims of that. So how do you keep from over hiring in a situation like that?
To your point, like, there's sales constrained, which nobody wants to be. Sales constrained is you have excess capacity. And then there's delivery constrained. Delivery constrained is you're selling ahead of what you can deliver, which also is not healthy, right? So you balancing it. It's an inexact, imperfect art. And, like most things, to best solve them, you collaborate and communicate. And, right hand needs to know what the left hand's doing. And, do the best you can with it. But I think that, you know, I've been in professional services for 18 years now, and that balance between capacity constrained and sales constrained is, you know, I think it's unavoidable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at some point they're going to come head to head, even if you're the best planner out there. There's only so many things that you can anticipate. And like I said, I think this year has been kind of a rude awakening for a lot of people that may have been perfectly within their right and predictive capability to say, well, there's no reason to think growth's not going to continue like this.
Yep.
Because there wasn't any reason to think that.
And
so
we're doing that right now. You know, we're in the throes of 2024 annual planning. And to your point, it's like, you know, we've been had the good fortune of having a great run, and you know, I don't need to tell you what the economy looks like, and you know, the outlook. If you read the news and everything else, it's like, you know, is this gonna, you know, can we count on the past being an indicator of the future, or are we gonna buck trends that the indices that some of us in the industry have bucked so far? So, you know, you just put your heads together and try to be responsible and not, you know, nobody's pushing all their chips in this year. You know, I don't think that would be a responsible play.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that. It's just hesitancy across the board.
Yeah.
You know, if nobody knows if the economy is going to bottom out or not, it's just let's hold on and wait until everything happens. And so we've seen a big slowdown in GRC services. Consulting firms, you know, laying people off and stuff like that. Any tips, I guess, for, you know, sales teams or professional services organizations out there for weathering the storm of a bad economy, especially when there's so much uncertainty? Like I always heard, for instance, in I believe it was MBA school, where they said, you know, a lot of companies tend to cut sales and marketing during downturns when really they should be doing the opposite to ramp up sales.
I was going to say jokingly, I think everybody should just hunker down and have very low expectations for next year, because that sounds like there'd be a lot of opportunity for us if that was the case, right? I think Buffett would say, you know, when everybody's playing defense is a great time to play offense, you know, also. So I don't know. I don't have the answer. I mean, every year I go through annual planning. Every year there's hypotheticals around the corner that look dark and gloomy, and there's also opportunities there around the corner that have unlimited upside. So, you know, I've probably been supporting annual planning for 12 years now, something like that. And it's a guessing game, man. It's a guessing game. Yeah, it truly is. I don't know. Just be responsible. Obviously, watch your cash flow. Build, you know, you can build a conservative hiring plan and have aggressive revenue and sales targets. I mean, that doesn't hurt, you know, as a services org. If you're the firm that manages it like a business plan that is separate than a sales plan, you can have a conservative business plan where you don't anticipate great headcount growth, you don't anticipate huge revenue growth, but it's sustainable. And also then carry forward the message with your sales team that we're going on offensive mode. And you know, that sales plan can be more aggressive. If that sales plan is tracking that plan or ahead of plan, then you can revise the business plan, right? So there are strategies that you can deploy to, you know, to basically be responsible without, you know, just sitting it out or calling it a bogey or a mulligan year, and you know, give yourself a chance to grow in light of the economy, I think.
Yeah, I think it's times like this that sometimes serve as great sorting mechanisms. We're kind of seeing that happen in a few different types of businesses. Like DFIR this past year has been an absolute bloodbath in terms of layoffs. And then now it seems like all the DFIR firms are getting busy again and they're all hiring again.
Really?
So it's just like this constantly. And you know, people get burnt out with that sort of thing if they don't feel safe in their job. they tend to want to go internal
And that's a
somewhere.
tough one too. DFIR, that's just a tough one in general, because you're effectively, what I call that is like the Ghostbusters. You're staffing up, waiting for the phone to ring, so that you can go all hands on deck in support of a suspected compromise. That is a really tough business to be in a downturn in. So I could see, doesn't surprise me at all. I've been a part of a firm trying to stand up a DFIR and all the uncertainties, and you don't want to staff so they can sit on the bench. That doesn't help the business at all. So I can only imagine, Pete, that makes a lot of sense that you would see that being tough. What's driving what's the impetus for them all hiring again? I'm interested to understand.
I think it's just an increase in ransomware engagements and business email compromise.
Yeah.
It seems to come in waves, and nobody's figured out how to basically deal with the ebbs and flows of the business. There's no simple answer to it other than being too large to fail, which is kind of what's happening, I think, with both a lot of the DFIR consulting firms and recruiting firms right now. Is the tough market is having a lot of recruiters go internal or leave the business. So we're going to have less competition, I think, on the other side of this economy. But in the meantime, everybody's got to buckle down and stay alive.
Get through it.
And same thing with, and the DFIR firms, it seems like it's the larger ones that are doing okay because they have the cash reserves and more resources to weather the storm, and it's pushing some of the smaller guys out of the business. So it's, that makes crazy sense. Times for sure.
Yeah.
Just I think a couple last questions here for you, Ryan. So one being, we didn't really talk about some of the challenges that you've encountered in hiring over the years, and obviously you've led some high-performing sales teams. Are there any kind of recurring things that you've encountered over the years that seem to be a common challenge?
In terms of the sales, on the sales front? Specifically?
Hiring and sales, or it could be hiring delivery to support sales, I guess, as well.
Yeah. Well, I just think, sales is tough to demonstrably, to be demonstrably a good seller, I think, is a tough thing to convey in a resume, ultimately. So I think my thing with, I'm actually a terrible interviewer. That my thing is, I'm not strong in interviewing candidates. I'm kind of have a natural desire to be likable and build friendships and deconflict conversations. Things like the question is like, I've heard of this hiring methodology. Could you have a beer with them? I could have a beer with anybody, so that's a bad question for me, right? Because I'm going to like you unless you just really are not likable. You know what I mean? So I rely actually on a lot of input from others, because I know that I'm going to probably think that they could do the job and be a fan of theirs and root for them and see us working together and all that stuff. So I kind of default to, we can do this, let's go. So I rely on a lot on others, but big thing with sales is like, show a proven history. If it's a seasoned role, like I want to know that you have a history of supporting a mission for longer than a year. Call me old school. I'm not a fan of folks that have, 9-10 jobs over a 15-year period. Like that's not, because then I'm asking myself, what am I going to get out of this person in 2 years? How much can they move the needle for us in 2 years? Because that's basically what your history suggests. But see what their work history looks like, and then see what their performance to plan looks like. And I know that's an easy thing to fabricate, but you don't see a lot of 180% of plan sales folks churning really frequently. So ultimately, it's like, what do the numbers suggest in the resume? What does the work history look like? And what do the folks that are supporting the team interview style think of him or her?
Yeah, that's a great strategy, having folks to rely on. And actually, that's something that's come up before in interviews or my podcast here is, having other people to bounce ideas off of. You may not notice a red flag that somebody else might. And it's good to get kind of a gut check if you're super excited about somebody. Maybe they picked up on something small that you didn't because you had a bias or, whatever it may be. It's a good way to keep biases from being too apparent is having a variety of viewpoints.
Yep.
One thing I've noticed in recruiting salespeople is sometimes it can be challenging to determine if somebody didn't meet their sales goals because the goals were unrealistic or because they weren't as good as maybe they could have been in meeting those goals. How do you differentiate between those two? Just a bad situation or a not so great salesperson?
Man, I don't know. I don't know that I do that well. I think what I'd love to hear, I'd ask the question, and I'd like to see him or her and what level of accountability they had versus deflection of blame. I think there'd be a lot in that. I have not hit 100% of my targets. Everybody that I know that said that isn't saying it 2-3 years from when they've told me that. It's inevitable. You don't bat 1,000 in sales. Some of it is because you get a bad territory. Some of it is because you get a bad number. Some of it is because the business overestimated the growth trajectory they were on. Sometimes it's because you didn't have a good year. Sometimes you didn't have a good year, right? So, I guess I would be more interested in the fact in how they answered the question about being 80% of plan than I would be the fact that they didn't hit 100% of their plans. In fact, if you send me a resume that said they've hit 100% of plans, I would probably just assume I'm going to get somebody that's dishonest.
Yeah, I tend to favor the idea that, like you said, you learn more about somebody based on their response versus what's actually on the piece of paper. What I could kind of pull out of that is it seems like if somebody has an internal locus of control versus external locus of control, they feel like they're in charge of their own destiny and they do take accountability or hold themselves accountable for their results. That's a pretty good sign that, even if they had a down year, they know that they're going to try to improve for the next year. And I would imagine 100%. Consistency and effort over a long period of time is what truly differentiates the really, really good salespeople from the ones that just get lucky sometimes.
Give me an accountable team player and we are going to make magic happen. Give me an accountable team player and we can do a lot of things together.
Yeah, that's a great attitude. So one last question for you, Ryan, as we wrap up here. Is there anything we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Get into the universities. How about that? I'll say that. We've been, not me. So we have a HR function we call HR Vibes at Risk360. So our Vibes function and the leadership there, Jessica, Lucas, we spend a lot of time today kind of locally in the greater Atlanta area with Georgia Tech, UGA, and Kennesaw State. I think just yesterday we were at Georgia Tech. We are actively trying to cultivate a presence within the local universities for Risk360 to get aspiring, maybe technology, maybe management folks into cybersecurity. We think it's, number one, it's good for them professionally because there's a huge shortfall in cyber and there are endless opportunities for advancement in short order in the space, but also because it supports our business, right? It's good for us to get high performers right out of school and let them learn the Risk360 way and teach them our way, not have to recondition them. So I would say get into the institutions, get into the schools. There are programs you could probably sponsor. We write a fairly sizable check, but by our standards to Georgia Tech to be a part of their Georgia Tech technology and management program as a paid sponsor, and we get a lot of face time on that campus as a result. And it's both a community service. We feel like we're giving back, but it is also very self-serving because it gives us access to up-and-coming high-quality talent.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've been a huge advocate for especially every services firm out there, whether you're an MDR provider or GRC consulting shop, you should be in the universities. You should be growing your own talent. Somebody's got to. And I think the consulting firms are the ones that can justify it more so than internal security teams because they know that they're going to get revenue off of the folks that they train up. And so it makes more business sense. So yeah, I think every consulting firm out there should be doing the same. So that's a great point. Well, Ryan, if people want to reach out to you, find you online, what's the best way to do so?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Ryan.McGowan at risk360.com. Check us out.
Awesome. Well, appreciate your time, Ryan, and thanks to everybody.
All right, thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.